For centuries, millions of people have knelt before a stone in Jerusalem, believing it marks the place where Jesus was buried. Others have doubted it, some have dismissed it as legend layered on top of legend. But recently, something changed. Beneath one of the most sacred sites on Earth, scientists opened areas that had been sealed, ignored, or unreachable for generations. What they found was not a dramatic artifact or a headline-ready miracle, but something far more unsettling. Physical evidence that quietly aligns with ancient accounts in ways no one expected. What exactly was uncovered beneath the site believed to be Jesus' burial place? And why are researchers choosing their words so carefully? That story begins underground. The investigation begins at a location known worldwide as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. For nearly 17 centuries, this structure has stood over a site identified by early Christians as the place of Jesus' crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. Empires rose and fell around it. Fires, earthquakes, invasions, and reconstructions reshaped its walls. Yet beneath all of that history, the ground itself remained largely untouched. What most visitors never realize is that the church is not built on flat land. It rests on uneven limestone bedrock that predates the Roman city of Jerusalem. Long before Constantine ordered a church to be constructed here in the 4th century, this area was a working quarry that was later reused as a burial ground. That detail matters because Jewish burial customs in the 1st century required tombs to be carved directly into rock outside the city walls, often near gardens or former quarry sites. For decades, scholars debated whether the original terrain under the church had been altered so much that any authentic burial context was lost. Layers of marble, concrete, and stone, added over centuries to protect the site, made direct examination nearly impossible. Removing them was politically sensitive, religiously delicate, and scientifically risky. That changed when structural concerns forced a rare restoration project. Cracks began appearing in the marble cladding around the tomb structure, known as the edicule. Engineers warned that without intervention, parts of it could collapse. What followed was not an archaeological excavation in the traditional sense, but a carefully controlled conservation effort. Still, it offered something researchers had not had in generations: brief access to what lay underneath. When restoration teams removed sections of the marble covering, they found more than expected. Beneath the decorative layers was a slab of limestone consistent with local geology. More importantly, it showed signs of having been cut and shaped by hand, matching techniques used in the early Roman period. This alone was significant. It suggested that the core of the burial surface had not been replaced or fabricated during later centuries, as some critics had claimed. It was original rock in its original position. As the work continued, researchers deployed ground-penetrating radar and other non-invasive tools to scan deeper below the surface. These scans revealed irregular voids, sealed cavities, and fractures in the bedrock extending beyond the visible tomb structure. Some appeared natural, others deliberately shaped or altered. At this stage, scientists became notably cautious in their language. They did not speak of chambers in sensational terms. They referred instead to subsurface anomalies, spaces that had not been mapped, documented, or accessed in modern times. Why the restraint? Because archaeology works slowly, and the implications were large. If these features were confirmed as part of a 1st century burial complex, it would mean the site preserved more of its original context than previously believed. It would also mean that centuries of construction had not erased the underlying geography described in ancient texts. What researchers emphasized repeatedly was this: the findings did not rely on tradition alone. They aligned with what is known about how Jewish tombs were constructed, where they were placed, and how they interacted with the surrounding landscape. No conclusions were rushed, no declarations were made. But for the first time in a long while, the physical ground beneath the church was speaking, and it was not contradicting the story people had told for centuries. Once limited physical access was secured, researchers relied on technology rather than excavation. Traditional digging was never an option here. Any aggressive intervention risked destabilizing a sacred structure shared by multiple Christian denominations, each with legal and religious authority over different sections. The only acceptable approach was non-invasive science. The primary tool was ground-penetrating radar. By sending electromagnetic pulses into the stone and measuring how they bounced back, Scientists could map density changes beneath the surface. Solid limestone reflects signals differently than air gaps, rubble, or carved voids. What emerged from these scans was not a single dramatic cavity, but a complex subsurface landscape. The data showed uneven bedrock extending beyond the visible tomb structure. In several areas, signals suggested sealed spaces, zones where the stone composition abruptly changed, consistent with either collapsed voids or deliberately enclosed cavities. These features were not accessible, and no attempt was made to open them. That decision was intentional. At the center of the study area stood the edicule, the small shrine enclosing the tomb. For centuries, this structure was assumed to be almost entirely symbolic. Rebuilt so many times that its physical connection to the original burial place was questioned. The scans challenged that assumption. Researchers found that the edicule sits directly over a carved section of limestone that matches known first-century burial forms. The rock shows tool marks consistent with hand chiseling, not later mechanical shaping. More importantly, the surrounding stone appears to slope and fracture naturally, suggesting the tomb was cut into an existing rock face rather than constructed artificially. This detail matters because Jewish burial customs of the period were precise. Tombs were not built like monuments. They were carved into rock walls, often in abandoned quarries or garden areas outside the city. The geological profile beneath the site matches that pattern closely. Still, the scientists avoided definitive statements. No press release claimed a discovery proved anything. Instead, researchers emphasized continuity, layers of use rather than replacement. The site appears to have been adapted, protected, and enclosed over time, not relocated or reinvented. One reason for the careful language is methodological integrity. Radar data shows shapes and densities, not labels. A void does not announce itself as a chamber. A fracture does not explain why it exists. Archaeology is interpretation constrained by evidence, not imagination. Another reason is historical sensitivity. The moment words like hidden chamber enter public discourse, expectations escalate. The research team made clear that nothing had been opened, removed, or revealed in the dramatic sense. What changed was understanding, not access. Yet the implications are difficult to ignore. If the subsurface features are part of an original burial environment, then the area retains spatial integrity far beyond what skeptics assume. It means later builders worked around the tomb rather than over it. It means preservation, not replacement, guided centuries of construction. What is most striking is not what the scans show, but what they do not contradict. There is no evidence of a later Roman tomb inserted into a Christian site, no sign of a relocated burial slab, no indication that the geography was fabricated to support belief. The physical context, as far as science can currently detect, fits the historical claims. At this point, the investigation reached its limit. Technology had mapped what it could. Conservation goals were met. The marble was restored, the shrine stabilized. The underground features remained sealed, unchanged, undocumented beyond scans, and intentionally left alone. For scientists, that restraint was the result. For the public, it was the beginning of a deeper question. If evidence continues to align quietly with ancient accounts, what does that mean for a site long caught between faith and doubt? That question does not belong to archaeology alone. As the research phase concluded, many expected a dramatic announcement, some definitive claim that would settle centuries of debate. That moment never came. Instead, what emerged was something far quieter, and for many historians, far more persuasive. The scans, measurements, and limited exposures revealed no signs of fabrication. There was no evidence that the burial surface had been imported from elsewhere. No indication that a later tomb had been inserted beneath a Christian structure to retroactively support belief. No architectural shortcuts that would suggest symbolic reconstruction rather than preservation. This absence is critical. For generations, skeptics argued that the site's importance was purely theological, that early Christians selected a meaningful location and built a story around it. But archaeology tends to expose shortcuts. When a sacred site is artificially created, inconsistencies appear: mismatched stone, anachronistic tool marks, displaced layers. None of those markers were present here. Instead, the physical layout suggested continuity. The earliest builders worked around existing rock. Later generations reinforced rather than replaced. The site evolved, but its core remained fixed. Another detail that drew attention was the surrounding bedrock. It does not form a neat symmetrical enclosure. It is uneven, fractured, and irregular, exactly what one would expect from a reused quarry face adapted into a burial site. From a construction standpoint, this is inconvenient. From a historical standpoint, it is authentic. Archaeologists are trained to be suspicious of convenience. Real ancient environments are messy, and the underground profile beneath the tomb is anything but tidy. Equally important is what researchers chose not to do. They did not open sealed spaces. They did not pursue spectacle. In a time when dramatic discoveries can bring funding and fame, restraint itself sends a signal. The goal was not revelation, but preservation. Some asked why the underground features were not explored further. The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Once open, context is lost forever. Archaeology is not repeatable. Every intrusion alters the record. In this case, maintaining the integrity of the site outweighed curiosity. This decision also reflects a deeper understanding within the field. Archaeology cannot confirm resurrection, divinity, or belief. It can only address context, whether a place fits its historical claims. And on that level, the site passed every test placed before it. What remains unresolved is not a failure of evidence, but a boundary of discipline. Science stops where meaning begins. Stones can tell us where people buried their dead, how they carved rock, and how later generations protected what they valued. They cannot explain why one tomb became the center of history. Yet the alignment is difficult to dismiss. The geography matches early descriptions. The burial practices fit the period. The continuity of location holds across centuries. And crucially, there is no physical contradiction demanding an alternative explanation. For many observers, this shifts the debate, not toward proof, but toward plausibility. Not certainty, but coherence. And coherence in historical inquiry is not a small thing. What happened beneath the site believed to be Jesus' tomb was not a revelation in the dramatic sense. No sealed chamber was opened. No artifact was lifted into the light. No claim was made that faith had been proven or disproven. And that may be exactly why these findings matter. Archaeology did not produce a spectacle. It produced alignment. The stone beneath the church fits the geography of a first-century Jewish burial site. The bedrock shows signs of being cut, not placed. The surrounding terrain reflects a reused quarry, not a symbolic reconstruction. And across centuries of rebuilding, the core location appears to have been preserved rather than replaced. Just as importantly, nothing was found that forced historians to rewrite the story. There was no physical contradiction demanding an alternative explanation. No evidence that the site was invented later to serve belief. In historical research, that absence carries weight. Science stopped where it must always stop. It did not attempt to interpret meaning. It did not speak of resurrection or divinity. It simply answered a narrower question. Does this place make sense within its historical world? So far, the answer is yes. And that leaves the final question not for archaeologists, but for each person who hears this story. If faith does not depend on proof, but the evidence quietly refuses to disagree, what do we do with that silence? That is where the conversation truly begins.